Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. So, normally during big news events, we take a certain pride around here in counter programming, which is one of the reasons why we released the Robert Dorr podcast yesterday. But every now and then, the gravitational pull of events becomes so strong that even light must bend to it. And so too must the Remnant. And so we are going to do a special episode today with a first-time guest, Damon Linker, who writes a fantastic Substack called Notes from the Middle Ground. Some of you may recall that we did a sort of a dialogue, old school dialogue, a couple weeks ago, which feels like a billion years ago, because I remember writing the last installment for it the day of the presidential debate. But we'll put links to all of that in there. He's also a lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania and senior editor at the New Republic. And though we've never, have we met?
I don't think we've ever met in person.
Yeah.
And I also should say I'm not a senior editor at the New Republic. That is not true.
It's fake. It's fake news. The internet says it's true.
Well, that's impossible to imagine that the internet had something wrong on it. Yeah, I mean, I was a contributing editor to the New Republic before I, in a big huff, resigned when they fired Frank Foer and Leon Wieseltier back in 14, 15.
I remember that to do. And yeah. I'm glad you're not at the New Republic now, because I don't think it's a very good magazine right now. And
it is never recovered from that event.
And now I am free to say so, because I loved the old New Republic. It was very influential on me, the 80s, 90s New Republic. And
yeah, that was the high point journalistically for me was having any time I could appear in the New Republic. I felt like I had made it as an intellectual. It was as good as it got back then, in my opinion.
All right. So, and I should say but we sort of have been exchanging accolades and fire since the old school blogging era. And yes. We are in internet terms, we're like the two old Jewish guys at the deli, kvetching over cured meats. Even though we haven't spent a lot of time with each other, we kind of know each other. So
yes,
Damon Linker, why don't we just sort of start? Let's start with the convention stuff, because it's just front of mind. We're recording this Wednesday morning. How do you see it going so far? Like, what are your impressions? I don't mean like, did so-and-so give a good speech, but like, what does this say about the GOP? What does this say about America? What does this say about, conservatism, yada, yada, yada?
Well, this is the first real RNC, I guess, we've had since 2016, because 2020 was, of course, the, lockdown weird year where both conventions were this strange virtual telethon-like thing. And compared to 2016, it is striking just how tightly scripted and on message it is. It definitely seems like, in that respect, the most successful RNC we've seen since 2012. But my goodness, what a different kind of message it is that is scripted. I mean, this it is a very focused meeting, emphasizing Trump, his greatness, his world historical significance, and then, of course, because of Trump's decision to pick J.D. Vance as his running mate, there's a pervasive sense, for me at least, that this is an ideological marker has been laid down. That, like, okay, we all know what we've been dealing with here for the last 8 years or so is this guy Trump, who has these instincts and impulses that point in a sort of, in larger terms of the conservative movement, kind of paleo-Kanish direction, and that his first administration. See, I'm anticipating. His administration definitely went in that direction, but yet also was very confused, and he had a lot of old style Reaganite Republicans around, and so it was unclear exactly what was happening there. Very undisciplined. Whereas the choice of Vance is like a statement that, you know what, from here on out, even if Trump remains, wins in 4 months and then becomes president, and even if that second Trump administration is an shit show, there's a legacy now. There's a direction for what will come after him, and it has very little, if anything, to do with the old Republican Party. And from the big event on the first night of the convention this time that really struck me, as it did many people, was the Teamsters Union president on there. Given a respectful airing, you have Trump and his running mate sitting there nodding along respectfully as he talks about the importance of unions and opposing right to work laws and so forth. So this is definitely a gesture toward a radically new GOP, the one that sort of has felt, I don't know, trying to be born, still born at various times over the last 8 years, but it's like they're standing up before the country and saying, aha, yes, the realignment has now been accomplished, and even Nikki Haley is here to give it the stamp of approval. That's at least how it feels to me. What are your thoughts on this? I know you may have more skin in the game over that change, and so not be as neutral in a description of it as I just was.
Yeah, no, I think that's all good and defensible and plausible, and I have no major first order objections to it. I see more contingency and serendipity and randomness to a lot of this. Insofar, I mean, I just put it this way. We've now seen a bunch of different reports that Trump was poised to pick Doug Burgum, and then Don Jr. and Eric flipped out and had a tantrum and dropped to the floor and kicked and whined and all that kind of stuff, and said, "What are you doing? This is so stupid." And Tucker Carlson called Trump at the last minute and said, "If you pick Marco Rubio, that will give if you pick a neocon, quote unquote neocon, like Marco Rubio, that will give permission to the U.S. intelligence services to assassinate you, so they can get the foreign policy guy they want as president. And all Rubio wants to do is lead America into a nuclear war." Because that's always, since Alcove #1, that's always been the goal of neocons, is to lead America into a nuclear war. That's the end. That's the carrot at the end of the neocon donkey's nose that we've been striving for all of this time.
Yeah.
And so the reason I only bring that stuff up is we would have a different conversation right now if he picked Doug Burgum.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so there's, and the idea, I mean, I see all these people, these stupid ass tweets from people like Josh Hammer and other people about how or the weird stuff from Sorab and that kind of thing, about how this is a seismic, from the ground up, sea change in the Republican Party and on the right, and everyone under 45, blah, 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 blah. And if this decision ultimately, and the other part was that Elon Musk, I'm not saying there was a quid pro quo, I'm not saying there wasn't, but within 12 hours of Elon Musk pushing Trump to pick Vance, he then announces $45 million a month to Trump's super PAC.
Right.
That might have had a role. So anyway, if let's just say, for the sake of argument, that played a role. So if the cunning and acuity and wisdom of Don Jr., the bribery of Elon Musk, and the paranoia of Tucker Carlson are the things that pushed Trump to make this decision, the idea that it is a profound and well thought out statement about conservatism or America needs some interrogation, as you eggheads might say.
Oh, sure. I totally agree with that. I mean, my view would be that what could be more fitting than that this realignment that we've sort of been seeing, but yet hasn't really been effectuated over these years, ended up taking place for these exact contingent reasons, that it had to do with a combination of Trump's vanity, his whining children, the promise of $45 million a year from the richest guy on the planet. A month, yes, a month, which means $180 million basically between now and Election Day. And that's exactly how you would expect a major ideological shift to be effectuated under the reign of Donald Trump, because he doesn't care either way. What he wants is power. And when he began this shift of the Republican Party by running this way in 2015 and 16, it was itself just a kind of impulsive sense that it would work. It's not like he was sitting around saying, I've been reading Pat Buchanan for all these decades, and I finally want to be the guy who champions this set of ideas versus this other set of ideas. He just intuited and was correct that if he said a certain list of things that were considered unacceptable in the old Republican Party, that it would activate a certain subset of voters. And he was absolutely right about that. And he also intuited, I think, that the party apparatus itself was kind of an empty shell and was ripe for an insurgency. And he thought he could try leading it. And he didn't even think that it would work necessarily. It's not like he really thought he was going to win the nomination and then become president of the United States. This was, as usual, like a marketing scheme for himself. Just the next step beyond birtherism to kind of get his name out there and elevate his personal brand. So kind of happenstance has been a driving force in all of this from the very beginning. But the fact is that there are factions within the contemporary Republican Party that wanted this. Mm-hmm. They're the people who are prevailing on Trump to make this pick rather than, say, Burgum, which I agree would have been a ridiculous choice. I mean, I don't see what Burgum would have gotten him in any respect other than a guy who he knew would not upstage him in any way, which for him is one real consideration.
Can we put a pin in that? So you think Burgum wouldn't be – I think Burgum would be electorally more useful than Vance. I think Vance is much more significant as a governing pick, but
I just don't see Burgum doing anything. I mean, his state has the population of Indianapolis. No one heard of him until he launched a campaign for president a year ago. I don't see how having a kind of boring, self-made rich guy from North Dakota, like that makes him somehow. I don't know what that gets him. I don't think that gets him any voters in the.
So let me put it this way. I think Rubio would be the better of the three. For I think the more obvious reasons. I think he's a better campaigner, and he'd have arguably some marginal effect on the Hispanic vote. But I think Vance actually hurts the ticket in a way that Burgum doesn't, right? And so with VPs, the first rule is first do no harm. And this idea that Vance is a unifying pick, I don't know what people are smoking when they say that, right? Because like Vance won in 2022, I want to say 5 points, 6 points?
About that, yeah.
Yeah, and Trump won Ohio by 8 in 2020, and DeWine, on the same ticket as Vance, won by like
20 points or something.
Yeah, 25 points. I mean, it was overperformed, triple Vance's performance, which is to say that Vance is not even popular to to a lot of Republican voters. And Vance, I have a lot of friends, and they're dear friends, and I don't need to lose any more friends, but who are making peace with voting for Trump, right? And they've been moving that way because of the Israel stuff and because of Biden's hot mess and all sorts of other things, and also just sort of a regression to the mean kind of thing. And I think they're wrong, but I understand where they're coming from. Excuse me. And they all hate to one degree or another Trump, or dislike, I should say. And they're horrified by the Vance pick, and they're having second thoughts now. And these are people, like, so I think there's a lot of that out there, and Vance is someone the Democrats can run against much more effectively than I think someone like Burgum. Anyway, so I just think it's not a unifying pick. It is a double down on MAGA pick, as you were saying earlier.
It's definitely the move of an extremely confident campaign. Like, that you don't pick Vance if Trump's running 2 points behind Biden, which, based on the Electoral College and recent history, could still mean Trump might edge it out by losing the popular vote again and just barely making it over the line. So it would then be more of a heading toward a kind of photo finish again. In that case, picking Vance would be pure idiocy, because you actually, might win a somewhat fewer votes with him. But I think he's definitely, given that Trump is running ahead, both nationally and in all of the swing states, some of them within the margin of error, and those, the upper Midwest, kind of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, those are the essential ones, based on the way things seem to be working out. Like, Biden needs to win all three in order to win, it looks like. So the idea that Trump could potentially be like putting those even more in play than they are now, because they're the ones that are closest. Though Trump is ahead, they're usually within the margin of error still. There is a risk to it, but I would say that, first of all, that was what you cited, the winning Ohio by like 5 or 6 points, is true, wasn't very impressive, but that was also before people really knew him. I haven't seen recent opinion polls about how Ohioans like him now that he's been in the Senate for 18 months. I do think he's a charming guy and can be articulate. I could imagine him doing quite well against Kamala Harris, which just goes to show how little I think of her as a public speaker, and someone who can actually debate ideas with someone who isn't just going to laugh along with her, cackle. So I think the Veep debate, assuming there will be one, could actually go pretty well for Vance. And, most Americans, unlike I'm sure your friends who are resigning themselves to voting for Trump and now are kind of shocked by having to also endorse Vance, most people are pretty keyed out of politics, don't really know who this guy is, maybe vaguely heard he wrote that book and there was some Netflix movie about him. And so they're going to be listening to the speech, which is going to be running, we're recording this Wednesday. He'll be speaking tonight in prime time. And I think a lot of opinions will be formed for the very first time on that basis. And so in the end, I suspect he'll end up being sort of a wash. And really the whole phenomenon of Trumpism from the beginning, this goes back to the contingency point, has been a sort of series of just chance events that end up being incredibly important for the Republican Party and the country. The fact that Trump ran on a fluke and ended up being president, the fact that after January 6th, pretty much everyone assumed he was done for, finished, and here we are, back again with him more popular than ever, something that I thought was pretty much inconceivable in late January of 2021. And now the fact that maybe for these ridiculous reasons, like his kids throwing a tantrum and Elon Musk offering money and Tucker Carlson, unwinding a paranoid conspiracy to him on the phone, Trump picks this guy to be his running mate and, assumed successor and heir apparent, could end up having the effect, if Trump wins, of pointing the direction forward for the party, just out of sheer chance. with this risky choice. Whereas Burgum, I don't think would have pointed in any particular direction for afterwards, because he just didn't come off, even within the context of the Republican Party, he didn't really come off as having much much ideological substance in one direction or another. And that was because, of course, like everybody running in that nascent primary, he, Burgum was both trying to signal, hey, I'm like one of those old style Reaganite conservatives, but yet he knew that he was running in the post-Trump party, and so had to throw down like little nods and winks about immigration and trade and other things like that. So instead of a more muddled situation, we're left with a much more vivid statement of like, okay, this is what Trumpism is and means, and if they win, that's going to really matter, I think, going forward. And we've seen it over and over again. People like you described who are like, I can't vote for him. All right, I guess I'll vote for him. What? He did that? I can't possibly vote for him. Yeah, I guess I'll vote for him because I just hate Biden so much, or Biden is senile, and the crazy, protesters on campuses. All those protests are going to start again in about a month once students come back and so forth.
All right, so let's broaden out, because I don't want to get too hooked on stuff that might be overtaken by events with the news thing. Although I do want to I want to put down a marker. I think my contempt for Kamala Harris is greater than your contempt for Kamala Harris. And we don't have to have a contest about this, right? Nonetheless, I do think she will do better in a debate against Vance than a lot of her detractors think. And I think one of the funny things is the projection. I saw a lot of this on Twitter, where a lot of Democratic partisans were like, oh my gosh, Kamala Harris is going to destroy this kid, Vance, in a debate. And a lot of Vance's fans were like, oh my gosh, likewise going to destroy Kamala. I think neither side should anticipate it being an easy debate. Harris, I'm not a fan of hers, but she's been in a lot of courtrooms. And when she actually does her homework, which she will be prepped to the gills, and unlike Biden, she will not cognitively go to a place that will not drive her to say we finally beat Medicare. And Vance is smart and young and crazy ambitious, and so I think it's actually going to be a much more substantive debate than with that it will be won, if it's won at all, by decision. Not by knockout. But that sort of gets to the point. So I don't know if I want to write this, and I'm so beleaguered I don't even know if I should say this. I think the stuff Vance has been doing to get Trump's support, to win his Senate race, to become the VP pick, has been abhorrent and detestable. I think many of his ideas are ridiculous. I think his explanations of his conversion to Trumpism is appallingly stupid. I mean, like, appallingly stupid. Like, his argument is that he was he let the mainstream media convince him that Trump was bad. And the idea, particularly in this day and age of do your own research conservatism, right? Of like, don't believe anything the mainstream media says. The idea that he's blaming the mainstream media for misleading him about Donald Trump is it's one of these great explanations that would be worse if you thought he meant it, right? If it were true, it would be worse than the lie that it is. And I don't think it's just a blatant lie. And I think it's one of these things that people are just letting him get away with for stupid reasons. All that said, there are people, I know people, who believe that basically he's like either a tech bro Manchurian candidate, which is much easier to believe, like basically he's just been put in there by Thiel and those guys and Musk. But there are other people who believe that he's still the JD Vance of like 2016, 2015, but he's made a purely craven political decision that this is what you need to do to get power. And then once he has it, he might actually be a lot better than a lot of his positions and ideas would suggest. I mean, do you think there's anything to that?
I don't. I think, and I say that in part as someone who has undergone a semi-ideological conversion in public on an extremely small scale compared to Vance. But you only get one of these in a career.
Just count up. Sorob's on his 9th.
Oh, that's true. But I think he's ridiculous. And I think a lot of people think he's ridiculous. I mean, he's on his 3rd just this year.
Yeah.
He's particularly absurd. But Vance did make a decision that, hey, to run for the Senate and get Peter Thiel's money, I need to be a different person. I need to be a Trumpist and become, in a way, the kind of ideological guru of Trumpism. And as I was saying earlier, I do think that there was a place for someone like that. Josh Hawley tried to fill it. Marco Rubio has sort of tried to fill it. Mike Lee has been sort of trying to fill it. But he made the resolution, look, I'm smart enough, articulate enough that I can be the guy, and I'm going to be the guy who actually puts meat on these bones, who will come out and say, I believe we should have a $20 minimum wage, put tons of upward pressure on wages. We should cut immigration. We should impose tariffs and raise tons of revenue that way, and also kind of conduct foreign policy by way of like carrots and sticks with our tariff policy, like it's the middle of the 19th century. And we should withdraw from Ukraine because we're overtaxed, and put all our chips on combating China because we can't be distracted. We have to make these choices. He's just developed things that lots of other people have been saying, but kind of put it together in a package to say, this is what a new post-Trump Republican Party can and should be, and I want to be its leader. And now, because of the chance that we've talked about, the contingencies we've talked about, he looks like he might end up in a position to actually try to effectuate this, to make it a thing, that this is now what it means to be a Republican. And you don't come back from that. You don't run that way, become Trump's Veep, and then sit there assuming Trump wins and then survives for 4 years. And then he's the heir apparent, the guy who's going to run for president again now in 2028 to succeed Trump. This is, of course, assuming Trump doesn't finagle things so that he can now run for a 3rd term because they were non-continuous. That's a whole debate, too. But so imagine everything is sort of normal and Vance is running in 2028. It's not like he's going to be like, aha, now I'm a neo-Reaganite.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work that way. Then he becomes a fool and a laughing stock. But the last thing I'll add on this point, though, is that speaking of contingency, with Trump, there is always maximal contingency. And it is entirely conceivable that for whatever reason, Trump decides, if he's president again in a year or so, that actually we're going to double down on supporting Ukraine, and I'm going to send Vance out to sell it.
Yeah, no, sure.
It's totally possible that could happen because, someone bribes him the right way. The Saudis decide it's in their interest for that to happen and promise him $100 million, some back channeled through Trump Jr. or something. So in that respect, we just don't know. And if that's the case, then Vance ends up becoming exactly this kind of laughing stock without having any choice in the matter, simply because he's the second in command to Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I largely agree with all that. I think the thing that makes stuff frustrating to analyze is never in our lifetimes, I assume we're roughly the same age, never in our lifetime has there been a politician who demands, that considers loyalty, personal loyalty, to be not just important, because a lot of politicians consider loyalty important, but superior to all other considerations, right? That was the genius of Vance's play here, is that he if you go into a casino and you bet, you put all of your chips on 7 on the roulette table. If you lose, you look like an idiot. But if you win, what's your system? How'd you know? That kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
He just put all of his chips on Trump. He went to Trump and he said, look, I don't care what I said in the past. I'm all in for you. He endorsed him quick. He stuck by him at rough times. He didn't get tempted by DeSantis and all that. And it paid off. And I think but for that, Trump wouldn't give him the time of day, right? It has nothing to do with Vance's. I mean, it may have something to do with Vance's positions and ideology and all that, but that's like second or third order compared to the loyalty thing. Similarly, just across the board and we've talked about this a little bit. I think we talked about this a little bit in our back and forth, is like because there is no serious, coherent ideological thing called Trumpism, right? Trumpism is a psychological phenomenon. The only safe harbor in the Republican Party right now, and on big chunks of the right, is to just say, I trust Trump, right? I defer to his judgment, because he reverses himself all the time, because he brags about it. I go with my instincts. I got to be unpredictable, all that kind of stuff. I mean, those poor schlubs at Project 2025, who worked really hard. And I think a lot of the catastrophizing and hysteria from the left about Project 2025 was overblown. There's stuff in there I really don't like. Don't get me wrong. And my contempt for Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, and what he has done to heritage and what he has done to the right in a lot of ways, really knows no bounds. But a lot of that stuff was just sort of boilerplate, off the shelf, conservative wonkery that you can dislike or not.
And a lot of they've been saying, I mean,
for years,
the conservative movement has been saying a lot of that stuff since the 80s.
Right. I mean, like, oh my gosh, let's get our panties in a bunch because conservatives want to get rid of the Department of Education. I want to get rid of the Department of Education. But anyway, my point is that every time someone goes all in on an ideological program that they're going to try to attach to Trump, they get burned or humiliated, right? I mean, like, Trump threw Project 2025 and Kevin Roberts and those guys under the bus so hard he should win a stuffed toy. And that's a real problem. Like last night on CNN, I was talking about how this is a really unpleasant time for DeSantis, because DeSantis thought he was going to be the Trumpism without Trump guy, right? He was the guy who had and he did have a coherent ideological agenda, and you can hate it or like it or mixed feelings about it. But it was a serious agenda, and I think he's a much wonkier, more serious guy than a lot of his detractors think. Doesn't mean I'm a huge fan, but I think he deserves, that credit. And now Vance is the heir apparent, and that's got to freak out a lot of these people, the Josh Hawleys and all that, right? But you point out, the point is though, the vice presidency, there's that great scene in The Wire where the old mayor is explaining what it's like to be mayor of Baltimore. And he says, on my first day in office, they bring me this giant bowl of fecal matter. And they say, you got to eat this. So I eat it. And then the unions come in the next day and they say, here's another bowl. You got to eat this too. And he says that eventually you just get tired of it on the job. That's what the vice presidency is. I mean, like, and it's not just for Vance. I mean, Kamala Harris had to be in charge of the frickin' border.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that is a monument. That's a bowl of feces so large you can see it from space. Yeah. And so, like, Vance, this idea. And so, anyway, I know now I'm monologuing. The thing that I get confused about on this is that normally I would say this is going to geld a lot of Vanceism, and it might. But I don't know if people are going to hold it against him the way they otherwise would, because in a party that says loyalty is the most important value, loyalty to Trump, standing with Trump no matter what he does in his personal life, criminally, whatever, does that get you out of any hot water for compromising on your permission, for flip-flopping on your positions? If you just say, look, I was doing what dear leader wanted me to do, and I it's hard for me to game that out.
Yeah, it is. And that's in that respect, we can't really know what Vance is going to look or smell like after 2 or 3 or 4 years as the underling to Trump. Now, it's also true that I don't think until the unbelievable Trump created debacle of the transition after the 2020 election, I don't think Pence was coming out of the Trump presidency looking that bad, other than being basically just a Trump toady.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't humiliated in a way like you're describing. Like, he didn't make Pence go out and be the face of something that Pence would have hated. Like, Trump says, actually, now I'm pro-choice. Pence, go give a speech defending that. He didn't make him do that. Trump didn't do that thing in particular, but just as an example of what that might have looked like. That would be the equivalent of making Vance go out and defend, doubling our aid to Ukraine after he's defined himself in the opposite direction. But it is true that to get a little kind of political philosophy on you here for a second, one thing that defines Trumpism is a kind of rebellion against both the rule of law and ideology. And one thing that ideology and the rule of law have in common is that they pin you down. Mm-hmm. What's the guy's name? Heath, whatever. Heath
Mayo?
Yeah, Heath Mayo is on Twitter all the time. He's Mr. Principles. Like, he's at the furthest opposite extreme. Everything's about principles. You have to have a principle and you stick to it. Well, the opposite of that is relying entirely on the great practical wisdom of the statesman who sort of sizes everything up in the moment based on his judgment. And Trump is a guy who wants more than anything else to have complete freedom of movement in any direction, no matter how incoherent it might appear, which means the rule of law is something he can't stand because it limits his freedom of action. And ideology is something he can't stand because it tells him, you can't say that. You said the opposite last week, and that's what we believe. And he wants to say, yeah, but I can make a deal if I say the opposite. So that's good. I should make the deal. And the problem for Vance, as for any vice president, but especially him, because he's turned Trumpism into a kind of nascent alternative ideology to Reaganism, is that he's going to find himself very likely in a position, if they win, of wanting to keep cultivating this coherent, stable cluster of ideas, wrong or right as it may be. Whereas Trump is going to continue being his haphazard, incoherent guy who wants to have the freedom to flip-flop in every which way and defy the law if need be, if he decides that's what's in his interest. And Vance is going to be in the position of having to defend it every single step of the way. And how he comes out of that meat grinder at the end of 3 or 4 years of this, when he's supposedly going to be setting up to try to succeed Trump, is really anyone's guess. It's impossible to know.
Since you made the grave error of saying, let's talk about political philosophy, it does come to mind, and I do want to get to the assassination thing. Maybe we can figure out how to steer the ship that direction. But, the Claremont guys, right? There are a lot of people who have said, I'll put it this way, their conversion to Trumpism, although, to his credit, Charles Kessler, I think, is trying to pull up from the nosedive on some of that stuff. So, and he's an old friend who I've had many disagreements with.
Hard to say with him because he's always the Cheshire cat.
Yeah,
he doesn't really tip his hat.
Well, that, when you grow up a level 32 Straussian, most of your writing is done in the space between the words and the lines.
Yeah. Believe me, I know. I'm working on a book on Strauss, actually.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
We'll have you back for that. But
that sounds good.
but the thing is, so I have friends who were not as surprised as I was by that crowd's turn towards Trumpism, and I was kind of agog by it. I was it really bothered me, and because I used to love the Claremont Review of Books, and there's still stuff in there that I find worthwhile and all that, but the Claremont
And Bill Vogeley still is the big guy over there, I think, and he has remained very Straussian in that respect.
Yeah,
that,
no,
I get the sense he doesn't like a lot of this, but he's mums the word.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and this is so deep in the weeds for normal listeners, but like the publication is far superior than the institution.
Indeed,
right?
indeed.
Yeah,
it's still very good.
The stuff the Institute puts out, separate from the CRB, is much closer to run of the mill, direct mail garbage. Anyway, my only point is that people were surprised. I was more surprised than some of my friends, and part of the argument that they'll make is that there was always this thing in West Coast Straussianism about getting to Lincoln, right? That the thing they liked most about Lincoln was him stepping out of the procedural liberalism when the moment required it and doing the statesman thing, right? Suspending habeas corpus, but in a good cause, right? That sort of Harry Jaffa, when the moment requires it, we are only constrained by the demands of providence and natural law and higher morality, and so breaking the eggs to make the highest good omelet is sometimes necessary, kind of thing. And I think there's probably some truth to that about why they were willing to project that more onto Trump. The Flight 93 thing and all that. The problem, it seems to me, is that when you try to over-egg that, right? When you try to force that, you're not going to will a Lincoln into reality. You're going to will something closer to a Nietzsche, right? I mean, there's a real Nietzschean strain in the arguments for and about and by Trump, which is, that it's will to power, creating your own morality, rejecting, in some ways it's like straight up rejecting the slave morality of Christianity. Yeah. It's very pagan in a lot of ways. And not just the testicle tanning stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, as a matter of logic, I am totally fine with the argument that when the times require a Lincoln, it's good to have a Lincoln. But the people who want to accelerate the prophecy, right, and force it, they're not going to get a Lincoln. They're going to get something, something from the monkey paw short story, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, here, since we're on political philosophy, here's 30 seconds straight out of Aristotle. The best regime simply is a kingship with the virtuous statesman at the helm, Lincoln. Right. The worst form of government is the rule of one tyrant. So someone who is a dictator who does whatever he wants for the sake of his own selfish good. So if you try to get the best, you are actually quite likely, if you're not lucky enough to have Abraham Lincoln hanging around, you're very likely to get the worst government. That's why it's much better to have a mixed regime with a Republican form of government and so forth, a kind of second best that is the best in most circumstances, even if not the best simply. So that's straight Aristotle, and it's something that our Claremont friends really should understand. But I think the other dimension to understanding the Claremont conversion has to be their reading of modern American history, focus on Woodrow Wilson, a kind of a misplaced divergence in American history and regime type in the early 20th century with progressivism, and that they read everything that's happened since then as kind of compounding awfulness, getting worse and worse and worse. If you push that far enough, you end up with the Flight 93 argument that basically we are hanging by a thread, that the alternative is absolute certain doom of continuing on this path, or a kind of Hail Mary crazy move of saying, actually, the reality show host, real estate mogul from New York is better than Hillary Clinton. And so we have to, not just we might entertain it, but we must go with him. And then once they do that, then they're able to convince themselves of all kinds of things. Because as I said earlier, Trump is defined by wanting absolute freedom of movement, total dependence on his own judgment, no interest in ideological or rule of law constraint. And that makes it sound like he could be the next instantiation of Abraham Lincoln. But in reality, it's much more likely he's just a petty tyrant. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the key to understanding Claremont is the kind of apocalyptically negative reading of everything from Wilson on that just gets worse and worse and worse. And, you know, Michael Anton, who, by the way, is my former boss from working for Rudy Giuliani. So there's a funny history there between us. But he, you know, his argument, he would respond to what I just said by saying, well, Damon, we all know you're not a true conservative. You bolted from the movement back when it wasn't even nearly as radical as it is now. So, like, why should we even listen to you? I, Michael Anton, am a true conservative, and things were bad after Wilson, and they were worse after FDR, and they were much worse after Lyndon Johnson and Roe v. Wade and gay marriage and transgender this and that. And so it is this apocalyptic moment. It's now or never. It's us or them. Choose your side. You, Damon Linker, you ridiculous, effeminate man. You are the problem. I am the solution. And Trump is our savior. There's a kind of logic to that sort of apocalypticism that I see as the main thing driving those guys. And that's where I simply don't. I can't even begin to entertain it, because I think the judgment, speaking of relying on one's own judgment, I mean, I wrote a post for my Substack about a year ago titled "Judgment is All We Have," because I do think in the end, a lot of these debates and decisions and disagreements come down to how do you judge how bad is it right now? If it's sufficiently bad, then yeah, maybe voting for Trump does make sense. If we are hanging by a thread, if the republic is about to collapse, then maybe we do, in that circumstance, have to support this crazy, corrupt, immoral guy as a last-ditch, desperate act. Where I diverge from all of that is just the assessment of how bad things are. And so a lot of what I write ends up being kind of trying to cool the temperature down. I agree with a lot of the right's critique of a lot of trends in American life. I just sort of say, well, a lot of that is just life. It's not liberalism that makes us this way. It's living in a free society, and we have problems and we need to address them. And it's important to talk about them as problems. The left often won't, because they sort of are afraid if they concede any ground to a conservative critique, they've sort of let the devil in the door. Whereas I'm much more willing to say, yeah, you know, some conservative critics have a lot of good points about, I don't know, the pornification of everything, the breakdown of the family, all kinds of stuff. But none of that means we're like on the edge of apocalypse and therefore need to, you know, throw everything down for Donald Trump. Like, if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, we would have been okay. There would have been another election, and the right could have tried to win that one, and then another one in 2024, and it just goes on. But
yeah, no, look, you're preaching to the choir here. I mean, I have to rise to the defense of hating Woodrow Wilson. But
I don't like him much either. I mean, I think one should be very critical of Woodrow Wilson.
But the idea that everything just got worse since Wilson is nonsense. You know, it's like a lot of my friends on the right love to say, all we've ever done is lose our freedoms. And I was like, well, it's not really true for black people or women, I mean, and it's not true in a lot of respects for white people and men. I mean, there's an ebb and flow to these things. Free speech right now is freer than I would argue than it's ever been. I'm not necessarily saying that that's an unalloyed good thing. But to listen to the catastrophizers, you would think that you're not allowed to say what you want to say, and it's all because of dumb arguments about Twitter, basically. But yeah, no, it's the teleology that drives a lot of this, right? It's this idea that there's this inexorable pull towards apocalypse, and that gives you permission to do all sorts of things that you kind of know are wrong, but the times require. And I personally think a big chunk of this stems from the sinister plague of boredom, that people want to live in a dramatic time, and so they create drama to justify feeling that way. But let's move to we should move to the attempted assassination.
Speaking of exciting times.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, we already did an emergency dispatch podcast about, all this a few days ago. So, and I've written about it. I'm glad that Donald Trump wasn't killed, right? I abhor political violence. Stipulated. I think I'm less enamored and thrilled by Trump's showmanship. Some dear friends of mine are just agog at the presence of mind to raise your fist and yell "fight, fight, fight" to a scared and angry crowd.
Manliness is back, baby.
Yeah, I like that. I'm less thrilled by any of that, and that has to do with my longstanding view that I don't like crowds, but and I don't like appeals to mob sentiment, even sometimes when they're uplifting. And I see this as less uplifting than a lot of my friends do. What I have, and so part of my whole spiel is I think the parties need to be stronger, that stronger parties are one of those. You're talking about the rule of law and ideology binding politicians. Another thing that was more tangible, maybe not more tangible than rule of law, because the rule of law involves police, right? But parties are supposed to be these things that constrain the flexibility and the freedom of members of parties and voters in parties, right? And they've completely gone by the wayside. You called them hollow vessels earlier. I think Ross Douthat, back in 2016, called them fully fueled jetliners waiting to be hijacked. Regardless, I find the argument that you get from a lot of people post assassination attempt, but also post indictments, post Mar-a-Lago raid, right? There is this idea that because Trump has been victimized or attacked, literally or figuratively, that we must rally around him, and that's a very Mark Antony with the bloody toga kind of logic. I find it similar. It's not quite a straight analogy, but there's a similar dynamic to the argument that Democrats make about how we owe it to Joe Biden to stick with him, right? And the reason I brought up parties is that a healthy party would say, yeah, that's why we're giving them a gold watch, right? That's why we're doing a special event for them or whatever. But it's crazy to make them our nominee or keep them as our nominee or whatever. But the absence of parties, the absence of those mitigating, mediating institutions means that the raw emotion governs everything. And just to bring it around back to the assassination, no one has been able to explain to me on paper. I get it on a visceral level. I just think it's stupid. But why? Because by all accounts so far, we may learn new facts, disturbed young man acting alone, registered Republican, took some shots at Donald Trump, that means I have to abandon all of my objections to Donald Trump and support him. And we saw a huge amount of that on Twitter, and in the social media reactions, and and on cable news, of people saying, I had my problems with Trump, but now that they shot at him, I have to support him. And there was no they. There is no evidence of any they here, right? Whether it's the left or the deep state or whatever. It's just a lone gunman whose motives we still don't know. We know his intent, but not his motives. And yet seems like an incredibly compelling point of view, and no one can really explain it. And I'm not asking you to, but because I don't think it's your position.
No.
But how do you process it?
It's hard to say. I remain as flummoxed about it as you do, I think. I mean, I won't even mention the name of the person. You probably know him. But someone on the right who works at a prominent media company tweeted after Trump was convicted of the 34 counts in New York a month or so ago, tweeted out, "I've never voted for Donald Trump. I've never liked him, but now I would crawl over broken glass to vote for him because he's now been convicted of felonies."
Yeah.
That is a far more of a non sequitur to me. It's less of a non sequitur if you can say, as you could see on Saturday night, the night of the assassination attempt, you could see so many people on the right online basically praying that this was some Antifa guy,
right,
who had, we were talking at the beginning about the New Republic, and how I used to have some affiliation with them, and now they're not nearly as good.
Total causal dynamic there. You're no longer there.
Yes, exactly. Once I was it was over. But their current cover is this ridiculous doctored photo of Trump looking just like Adolf Hitler. And it says at the bottom in, the old Prussian script, American fascism at the bottom. And, this has been said a million times over. And I think there are serious and not serious ways to talk about Trump and fascism and how they're similar and dissimilar. But that kind of an image is just pure sensationalistic nonsense. And so it's as if a lot of people on the right were dying to hear this guy is a committed leftist who, they're going to find in his apartment that issue of the New Republic and a screed where he explains, "I've wanted to be a good law-abiding citizen, but the media keeps telling me this guy is evil and must be eliminated. And so I'm going to read the dead zone and I'm going to go out and I'm going to make this real because he's Martin Sheen." And of course, good pop culture references to the 80s because I'm talking to you, Jonah. And as you noted, so far what we know, none of that is true. He was a registered Republican, big into guns. He's a very disturbed man. We have lots of shootings in this country, both political assassinations, but far more commonly just troubled young men who shoot up crowds for no good reason whatsoever. And it so far looks very much like this is a case of that. It's like, it's the latest example of I did it to impress Jodie Foster from Taxi Driver, trying to kill Reagan. And so, but you can see the causal that would explain this. Not that, again, that it justifies it in any way. It makes sense. But the reason within the logic that you sketched is, if it's true that the left is why this happened, then you could see, well, I guess I have to vote for this guy because voting for him is taking a stand against that evil, dangerous, violent opposition. That it's either the great Trump or them, the people who would murder him rather than see him win. But this is all a fantasy that they have conjured in their heads based on extrapolating from some sort of unhinged left-leaning pundits who say ill-advised, imprudent things on social media about Trump and how he's awful and how he's dangerous and he's a fascist and wouldn't we kill baby Hitler if we could, and
Right.
he's Hitler, therefore they want that therefore to have a real meat to it that will give them permission to do what probably they want to do anyway, which is vote for this guy who really turns their stomachs in all kinds of ways. And that once again is just something I can't even get close to endorsing. I just think it's irresponsible, and it's sort of, it's making politics into a kind of dream logic, which is another thing that Ross Douthat wrote about a lot around the last election. This kind of dramaturgy that like gets projected out of our dreams and nightmares onto a much more boring and prosaic world.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, in Suicide of the West, that was a big part of my explanation about why things have gone south, is that we follow politics like it's a form of entertainment. And so we project upon it huge, heroic, dramatic narratives of good and evil. And, and it's why conspiracy theories, I mean, it's one of the reasons why conspiracy theories are so much more, I don't want to say they're more popular, because people have always had a penchant for conspiracy theories in this country, but they're so much more mainstream, right? Is that conspiracy theory is a way of imposing literary narratives on contingent real life events.
Yeah.
So, and I want just last point on that, because it's in my head. It's one of the reasons why important institutions need to do their jobs professionally and well, because when they screw stuff up, the public's instinct now is to go straight to conspiracy theory. And so, like the Secret Service, I think incompetence and happenstance and contingency and stupidity explain how this kid was able to get up on that roof and all that kind of stuff. But it is so incompetent and so bad, and the responses from the head of the Secret Service are so bad, that this is one of these times where I kind of understand why so many people are going to conspiracy theory, because when the actual explanation is so unpersuasive, then you think there must be something else going on.
Well, I mean, I guess on that I would say, I mean, there hasn't been an investigation yet, and I'm perfectly willing to let that unfold before really rendering a severe judgment of it. But I agree, it looks bad. But I'm far more willing and inclined to just credit stupid incompetence to this. There's no conspiracy. It's just that these people do these events every day all over the country, and they're probably tired and bored, and they have 1,000 of them in a row where nothing happens.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And so they're kind of half daydreaming, not paying attention as much as they are supposed to. And then there's an actual event taking place, and you have to react in a split second to decide, wait, what do we do? How was I trained to handle this? Where's the shooter? And then, and people fall down on the job, and it's bad. I mean, one of the narratives of our moment, kind of I think, more responsible version of the Neil Ferguson argument that I would never say we're like the Soviet Union in its final days, but I would say, and I have said in a New York Times op-ed last spring, that there's a lot of evidence of institutions just falling down on the job.
Oh, for sure.
Doing a crappy job of what they're supposed to do. And one way of responding to that is to say, the whole system is corrupt. We have to dump the whole thing and start over from scratch with all of my incredibly much more competent friends setting it all up from scratch. And I'm Donald Trump going to do that, where it just makes me roll my eyes roll out of my head at that. The other option, which I, in my op-ed and for the Times, made a pitch to Biden, even though I knew he would never listen to it, and now I know he's far too far gone to even entertain it, but was to essentially say, how about run for re-election, not proposing big new expansions of Medicare or big other ambitious progressive proposals, but actually just say, I'm going to be a reformer. I'm going to fix our broken institutions. I'm going to do a bigger version of, what Al Gore was tasked with during the Clinton years of like kind of fixing the bureaucracy, streamlining the red tape, making it all work better. And so, if that Biden were running, he would have responded the day after the shooting and just fired the head of the Secret Service and said, you know what? Maybe it was just a kind of trivial dropped ball, but you're the head of this agency and you monumentally screwed up. And so you're out. We're going to find somebody else who can do it better because it has to be better than this. And he could kind of then marshal some of that populist rage against the system and show that the system itself can fix itself rather than becoming defensive and saying, everything's great, everything works fine. Don't point your fingers at us. You'll give fodder for the right if you would concede anything. So anyway, I mean, that's...
So I'm 100% behind with an agreement with you about the sclerotic nature of a lot of our institutions, sort of intellectual inbreeding and groupthink that drives a lot of them to dysfunction, on the left and the right. But it's more important. It's a more biting and serious point about the left because the left controls left of center. I'm not saying it's a unified monolithic thing, but like people on the left of center, Democratic Party aligned people control vastly more of the important institutions.
A lot of stuff.
And so I'm a big believer that most of our problems are American problems and they just manifest themselves differently on left and right because left and right are different. But, right wing has a cancel culture, left wing has a cancel culture. There's important similarities, there are important differences of them because it's an American problem, but right wingers are going to cancel different people than left wingers and yada, 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 yada. And I agree with you. I think this was a screw up. I don't think it was anything more than that so far. And the reason why I don't think the conspiracy theory stuff makes sense is that when you actually ask people beyond their headline position, I think it was an inside job. I was like, really? So you think this was the guy the deep state would hire to do this?
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
and then you hear others like on the left are buying into his conspiracy theory that like the whole thing was a setup to make Trump look good.
Right.
And like you mean there's a sniper 130 yards out and you're going to trust he's just going to nick his ear?
Right. And like I want to see the pitch meeting with Trump about this,
Yeah, exactly.
And since you're a former First Things guy, which we have not mentioned,
yes.
So more about is the correct pronunciation? It's one of these words I know how to read and write, but saying it out loud I don't get a lot of opportunities. Theodicy.
Theodicy, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I am in the tradition of William F. Buckley. While not being Catholic, I think one of the core things about being a conservative is you have to have respect for the transcendent. You have to have respect for religion. I do not like mocking religion, anybody's religion. Some cults I'll mock from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And I am probably one of the most pro-Catholic secular Jews in the English language. So I don't want to mock anything, but I do have a real problem with the argument all over the place. Particularly a lot of blonde women on Fox lately have been saying how this was all guided by God, and that that's come up in the convention speeches. I don't blame Trump at all for feeling that way, right? Like being shot at and missed or near missed is a heady thing, so to speak. But can you walk me through the case scripturally, biblically, theologically, about why God would send the sniper, have him go through a shooting at Trump on a suicide mission, miss Trump, and kill a dad protecting his family, right? So did God will the death of the innocent bystander when he spared Trump? Is that like, I know God works in mysterious ways, but I have a real, it feels kind of like a diss of God to make that argument. And I'm trying to get my head around it.
Well, I mean, that's an argument against any form of providential thinking, because it's the case that there are always innocents who are harmed, often an order of magnitude or more than one guy at a rally getting killed while Trump survives. If you buy into, and I don't, but if you buy into that kind of theodicy or providential thinking about God really intervening and kind of controlling the game board at that level of intervention, you very quickly have to reconcile yourself to a notion of God who is extremely a consequentialist, like who's just like, what matters is the end of this particular epicycle in the unfolding of history. And what matters here is that Trump be elevated and, I don't know, like, be ensured that he becomes president again, ensured that he gives a vision of courageous masculinity to an effeminate nation. I mean, there are any number of ways you could try to spin why God would want Trump elevated through a spectacular event like this. And then when it comes to the poor guy who was a big Trump fan and got killed, shot right in front of his wife and kids, you have to just be like, yeah, well, you know, stuff happens and there are always innocent victims. That's how history unfolds. And that guy's up there in heaven right now and he got his reward and it's all okay. I mean, I don't think that way for any number of reasons that would take, you know, several hours of discussions to explain. But I find the rapidity with which people move to that to be really just another example of the conspiracy theories. I mean, it's just a kind of, it's a conspiracy theory with theological imprimatur added.
It's God in the gaps again.
Right. It's what it is. And one reason why I think conspiracy theories are surging in our time as much as they are is that this is something. I attended this great conference in D.C. last weekend called Liberalism for the 21st Century, a kind of, you know, like remnant group of center-left and center-right people trying to buck up for the potential future Trump administration. And Ann Applebaum was there, who's someone I really like a lot. And she had a great, she was talking about, like, why is this happening, not just here and all around the world. And one of her primary emphases is we live in a very confusing time where the supercomputers we carry around in our pockets deliver floods of information from all over the world. And a lot of people find themselves extremely overwhelmed and trying to make sense of it. And how do you make sense of it? You find a conspiracy theory that kind of puts it all in order. It makes some of the data points are on one side for the antagonist and other data points are for the protagonist. And it creates a story in which it all makes sense. And that's hugely important for people. And I think this kind of theodicy reading of the Trump assassination attempt is just another example of that. They don't want to believe that if his head had been 2 inches this way, his brains would have been blown out and he would have been dead. And who knows what path we would have been moved down as a country. I shudder to think about it. How could it be that it's just chance that he had his head this way, but then he moved it this way the second the bullet came, and so it only nicked his ear, non-mortal injury, and he's going to be fine. The thought that everything comes down to something that random is a scary thought, I think, for many people. It's something they can't wrap their minds around, and so they would rather it actually be a very dramatic story in which the people I care about, my side of things, actually is the victor, the hero. That's very comforting. And I know that's very condescending. And, you know, if Ross were here, I'm sure he'd offer a much more affirmative reading of what the motives are for that kind of thinking. But in the end, that's how I make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I meant to say earlier when I said I was 100% agreement with you about being a reformer, that I think there's zero chance Biden would ever have done it. And I think structurally the Democratic Party is incapable of it because it is. We used to say it's the party of government in a sort of figurative way, that the Democratic Party thinks the government can do all sorts of wonderful things. I think now it's literally the party of government because it is so dominated by public sector unions and people who professionally need government to continue to exist as it currently exists. And so you're going to need a reformer from the Republican Party to do it. And I don't think the Republican Party is moving. I mean, that's the best spin you can put on the Project 2025 stuff. I don't think Project 2025 is the vehicle that would get it done, and I don't think Donald Trump is the guy to get it done. But and instead, what we're getting is now, with Vanceism, a Republican Party that looks more and more like the Democratic Party in terms of its relationship to government. Right? It wants to use government. That's how I see Vanceism is this boneheaded idea that Hayek's knowledge problem is only a problem for progressives, and that if we have our experts running everything will be great because we know how to do stuff and we can confiscate their stuff and we can put our people in charge and there will be no unintended consequences and we can, pursue government for the highest good. And that's why Sohrab Ahmari is now basically he's moved from being a pro-life New Dealer, which is what I accused him of being about 18 months ago, and he proudly took that label. And now he is apparently a pro-choice Great Society guy. So his evolution continues. But I mean, do you? I know we're running long, and I got this board meeting in 5 minutes. But do you think? I mean, you're now a Democrat. You're or at least Democratic adjacent. I don't know what your actual party affiliation is, nor do I care. But do you have much hope for the Democratic Party to be able to internally fix itself? And do you think Biden should step down?
I do think Biden should step down. In fact, I wrote a post a week or so ago saying that I am a Democrat in the sense that I'm a registered Democrat. I haven't voted for a Republican since 2002. But I can't vote for Biden. I think he is gone. I refuse to vote for a guy who's unfit for office to prevent another guy who's unfit for office from winning. That I won't do that. It's perfectly okay not to vote. I'm not going to vote for some tiny third party because I don't believe in them. With our electoral system, it doesn't work. It's a stupid exercise, in my view, of kind of vanity that somehow like the gods will see me cast my vote, even though it doesn't have any effect on anything. I mean, all voting is sort of pointless.
Yeah, but I mean, in defense of just write-in candidates, right? I wrote in Mitch Daniels last time. At the very, 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 very microscopic level, it does send a signal about what the electorate wants and is not getting. That's the only argument I would make about it.
I wouldn't even know who I'd write in. But anyway, as for the Democratic Party in general, I think it is marginally better off as an institution than the Republican Party. And you can see that even if it fails, but the drive to get Biden to step down at this, unprecedentedly late date, which would be extraordinary if he actually did that and we spent the next month with the Democrats trying to figure out who the hell the nominee is going to be. Even if that effort fails, which I worry it will, we have been through a convulsion where the party is actually at its own throat, different factions fighting with each other in public about what to do about the Biden problem in a way that signals maybe that the Democratic Party is still where the Republicans were in 2016, but I actually think that it might be a little bit better than the Republicans were then. So maybe the way the Republicans were in like 2014 or something. So, but when it comes to the bigger issue of whether the Democrats might, embrace some kind of reformism, I agree with you that there are all kinds of structural impediments to that among the Democrats, and that the public sector unions are a big part of it. And then the Republicans, that is a huge topic, and I'd probably have to come back for a separate conversation. It's the whole question of, wait, does the right want to deconstruct the administrative state or seize the administrative state? Or are they somehow the same thing? Like, is really like the debate we need on the right between Steve Bannon for deconstruct and Adrian Vermeule for seize?
Right.
And like that will decide the path forward? Or are somehow those two things the same? Just kind of squint and tilt your head the other direction, and actually they're saying the same thing. Because the fact is, I assume you would agree with this, but I don't know. We need an administrative state. We need something there to help run this massive, giant, modern, teeming, commerce-driven entity we call the United States with its 330 million people. It's a complicated world. And someone has to be overseeing it, and those people should actually know something. Not that it's going to help them solve everything, because the smartest people in the world can screw things up really bad. But it's better than putting in Random Joe from the phone book, or let alone Random Jane, whose only criterion for expertise is that she really, really loves Donald Trump and will do anything he says. Because if he says do X and you have absolutely no idea how the government even runs, you won't even be able to execute that simple direct command. And so we need people who know what they're doing.
I agree with that. I mean, the administrative state conjures associations that have constitutional problems, but we need a good bureaucracy in this country. We need good bureaucrats, qualified civil service, however you want to call it.
I'm all in favor of, say, Congress taking a firmer hand and guiding what the administrative state does. That's not a problem for me.
No, I agree.
But we need something.
And the Bannon versus Vermeule point is well taken. It does seem to be this sort of weird, what Vergellen called it, metaxy, where they want it to be both a floor wax and a dessert topping, right? And they can't make up their mind on it. Anyway, I really got to go. I got a meeting to go. Damon, well, I'll definitely have you back. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, I'm happy to have been here. Thanks so much.
And Damon's Substack is called Notes from the Middle Ground. And thank you again.